Suppose you have an application that needs to access Azure resources like storage, Key Vault, or a database, but the challenge here is that the application cannot log in like humans, like we do. Applications don't type usernames and don't complete multi-factor authentication. So how does application securely authenticate with Azure and make changes or read in the cloud environment? So Azure provides two solutions for this. We have service principal and managed identity. In this video, I'll explain what service principals are, what managed identities are, and when to use either of them. And I'll show you a real demo where a third-party applications like Azure DevOps, Terraform, or a code accesses Azure using a service principal. So before we go deeper, let's quickly understand identity types in Azure. So we have a human users, which has a user account in Azure. And us, when we authenticate into Azure, we use a username and password and optional multi-factor authentication. But in the case of applications, we have service principals and managed identities. We deep dived in Azure identities in the last video, which you can see in the right top. You can check that out for more detailed information. For this, we'll cover service principal and managed identity. Both provides an identity for a service or a resource. Both are used to interact with Azure. But the difference between the service principal and managed identity is that how do we use them to access Azure. So service principal is basically used whenever we want to access Azure from third-party applications, scripts or code or the CI/CD, right? So whenever we want to access Azure from outside of cloud, I'll show you in the demo how we are going to utilize it. And these credentials allow an applications to authenticate with Microsoft Entra ID. And the next we have is a managed identity. Managed identity is used mainly for resources which are within Azure. For example, one Azure resource needs to talk to another. We use managed identity. And the key difference here is, as the name suggests, it is a managed identity. All the credentials, secret password rotations is managed by Azure. We just create the identity, assign the permission to the resource what it's going to access, and that's it. Azure handles authentication automatically. And managed identity is commonly used when your application is running inside Azure, such as Azure VM, app service functions, Kubernetes service. All these resources, when they need to talk to each other, you can directly do that with creating managed identity and then assigning permissions. In my previous video, I showed a complete demo of managed identity accessing Azure Storage from VM. So you can check that out if you want to understand the working of the managed identity. And in this video, we'll be covering the demo of the service principal. And now before proceeding with the demo, let's understand the key differences between them. So if our applications who are trying to access Azure is running inside Azure only, you can use the managed identity because it's more convenient, no password management and less governance. But in case when the applications are running outside Azure, like example, Azure DevOps accessing Azure, Terraform making changes to the infrastructure resource, in that case, we use service principal. So for example, if I Azure VM accessing storage, managed identity, for Python application on a local machine, service principal, and if a Azure function needs to access Key Vault, then managed identity is the way, right? So the choice depends mainly on where the workload is running. And also when I say there's less management in the identities because in the service principal, we have to manage the passwords and certificates because they get expired and we have to renew it. And also we have to store it safe so that it doesn't comes in the code. And managed identity, Azure handles everything. No password management required, right? Now let's look at a real scenario. Imagine we have a Python application running on a developer laptop. This application needs to access Azure Storage. And since the application is not running inside Azure, we cannot use managed identity. So in this case, the correct solution is service principal. And let me show you how this will work. So to access it, we would require the service principal. So we'll head over to the Azure portal and create one. And then we'll use the client ID and secret, which will then check if the identity is present in the enter ID, and then it will check the RBAC permissions, right? So we'll cover all these three aspects, and let's go to Azure portal. So when we log into Azure portal to create the service principal, we'll go to Microsoft Enter ID, then to this app registration, and you can click on new registration, then give your application a name, Python app. It will work on this directory only where I'm creating it, or it can work across multiple Enter ID tenants, and then that's it. We'll click on register. So identity is created in the Enter ID. You can see we have a client ID. Now the application client ID is the important one, which is we are going to use as a username to access, and also the tenant ID will be used. To get the secret, we'll go to certificates and secret. We can create the certificates which can be used as authentication to confirm if this identity is part of this account. We can also use the client secrets or federated credentials. So we'll be going with new client secret. So in the new client secret, it will ask you to what do you want to give it a name. I'll give same name Python app, and then we can set the expiration. For this case, I'll proceed with 12 months, and this value is the password. We can copy it. Secret ID we don't require. So our combination now becomes application client ID being the username and password will be this. So now if anyone who has these credentials can access Azure account. Now we created the client ID and secret in the enter ID. Now we'll use the VS Code to run our application. For that, let's head over to the VS Code. So I'll create a new file in the Azure projects and then give it a name python app.py. And now we have the code and let's fill up the information. So we'll copy the value, paste in the client secret. Next we'll copy the client ID. And next we'll use the tenant ID. So we have the tenant ID, we have the client ID and the client secret. Now we have got the Python application and the enter ID configured. Now let's create a storage account, and the simple test we'll do is Python application will access the storage account from my local laptop, right? Now for this we'll go to storage account, click on create, and I'll just fill up some information. Python test storage account 101, and then go next. I'll keep everything as default, review and create, and then create. So the storage account is created, and let's go to containers and create one with the name demo container, and I'll upload an image, right, and then upload. So now we have created a container, and let's now try to access it from my local. Now if you see the diagram, we have the client ID secret, we have the application in the enter ID and also the storage account, but we do not have the RBAC permission. Right now the identity in enter ID just exists there, but it doesn't have any permissions. Unless we give permission, that identity won't be able to do anything. And now to give RBAC permission, we'll go to the storage account and then go to IAM, then role assignment, and then we'll search storage blob contributor. Next, and in here you can see the service principal option, so we'll select. Right now what you're seeing are the users for the application. I'll just copy the name which we created and then search, and you can see here we have tag as an application and also the name. I'll select and then next, and then review and assign. So the role is assigned. Now we have the entire flow completed, and now we'll check the connection. So the Python application will authenticate using service principal with the client ID and secret. It will check in the enter ID if the identity exists, and if it exists, it will check what permission it has, and the permission we already assigned to storage account. And now to access it, we'll go to terminal and new terminal, then run python app.py. One thing we missed out, that we had to put up storage account name here, right? For that in the portal, and let's go to storage account. We'll just copy the name of the storage account, change it, right? And then again try. So you can see, I can see the container name, which is demo container, right? So this is how service principal works for all the cases whenever used outside of Azure. So let's quickly recap. Service principal we can use when application runs anywhere. Credentials management is required, manual, because we have to renew the secret when those get expired, and the secrets are required, right? And best for external application, DevOps tool, Terraform, etc. And in managed identity, when the resources are inside Azure, credential management is automatic. We do not require secrets, no management, and used for Azure services. So both service principles and managed identities are extremely important concepts in Azure security and automation. If you want to understand managed identity in detail with a full demo, check out my previous video linked in the description, and give a like and subscribe if you like the video.